The air in Damien Sterling's penthouse office felt thin, despite the state-of-the-art climate control. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing down at the sprawling city, a kingdom built on deals, dominance, and his own relentless drive. But tonight, the glittering lights felt less like a triumph and more like the bars of a very luxurious cage. His jaw was tight, a familiar ache settling deep in the muscle. In 3 days, he was getting married, not to a woman he loved or even liked. He was marrying a stranger, a pawn in the biggest, most critical business merger of his career, and everything he'd been told about her made his stomach churn. Amara Adebayo. The name itself sounded foreign, heavy on his tongue. Daughter of Nigerian energy tycoon Chief Adebayo, whose cooperation was essential to prevent a hostile takeover that would cripple Sterling Industries. The deal was ironclad, the terms non-negotiable, and the most archaic, most unbelievable term? Marriage. His father, old Theodore Sterling, a man who viewed emotions as liabilities, had brokered it. She's suitable, Damien, Theodore had said, his voice clipped, avoiding eye contact in that way that always meant he was hiding something unpleasant. Solid family, good stock, not a distraction. Damien had pressed. What did she look like? Was there a picture? Theodore had waved a dismissive hand. Pictures are irrelevant. She's plain, very traditional. You won't be tempted to neglect business for frivolous pursuits. Let's put it that way. Later, a trusted but gossipy associate who dealt with the Adebayo family's lower ranks had filled in the blanks, his words painting a grim picture. Heard she keeps to herself, Damien. Very sturdy build. Strong features. Not exactly a society belle. Heard she's quite dark, too. You know how some of those families are, focused on tradition, not looks. Sturdy build. Strong features. Plain. Not a distraction. The words echoed in Damien's head, morphing into a single, cruel image. Ugly. He envisioned a woman awkward and ill at ease in his world of sleek lines and polished surfaces. Someone heavy-set, perhaps with skin imperfections hidden beneath traditional garb, features harsh and unrefined. He imagined the pitying glances from his social circle, the snickers behind hands at galas, the sheer, unrelenting embarrassment of having her on his arm. He wasn't proud of these thoughts. He knew they were shallow, prejudiced even. He dealt with brilliant people of all backgrounds and appearances in business every day. But this wasn't business. This was marriage. This was the woman who would share his name, his home, potentially his bed. The thought made him physically recoil. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, frustration bubbling like acid in his chest. He'd always dated women who were, well, the opposite of what he imagined Amara to be. Sleek, sophisticated, aesthetically pleasing companions who understood the unspoken rules of his world. Women who looked good in photographs and required little emotional investment. This felt like a punishment, a sacrifice laid on the altar of commerce. He hated Chief Adebayo for demanding such a price. He hated his father for agreeing to it. And, though he hated to admit it, he hated Amara Adebayo for simply existing, for being the embodiment of this unwanted obligation. He pictured the wedding day, him standing stiffly at the altar, waiting for this plain, the forced smile plastered on his face feeling like a mask cracking under pressure. He imagined the wedding night, the sheer awkwardness, the potential repulsion. How could he build a life, even a purely functional one, with someone he couldn't even bear to look at? He turned from the window, the city lights now mocking him. The deal was everything. Losing Sterling Industries wasn't an option. It was his legacy, his identity. He would go through with it. He would marry the ugly woman. He would be polite, functional, He would ensure she had every material comfort, kept out of sight as much as possible, and he would throw himself even deeper into his work, the only place he felt truly in control. He picked up a heavy crystal glass, pouring himself a stiff measure of scotch. He needed it. He needed something to numb the dread, the disgust, the unsettling certainty that he was tying himself to a life sentence of quiet embarrassment, all for the sake of a balance sheet. He downed the scotch in one gulp, the burn a welcome distraction. 3 more days until he met his bride. 3 more days until the charade began. He braced himself for the worst. The day arrived cloaked in a tense, unnatural calm. The wedding was a small, private affair, held at a neutral, luxurious estate outside the city, another stipulation of the contract, designed to minimize press and unwanted attention. Damien stood at the front of the elegantly decorated room, his tuxedo feeling like a straitjacket. His father stood beside him, radiating a quiet satisfaction that grated on Damien's nerves. Chief Adebayo and a small contingent of his family sat opposite Damien's own sparse representation. There was a palpable tension in the air, the forced cordiality barely masking the high stakes of the merger that hinged on this union. Damien kept his eyes fixed on the ornate double doors at the end of the aisle. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with anticipation, but with a grim sense of finality. He replayed the descriptions in his head. Plain, sturdy, strong features, not a distraction. He steeled himself. Be polite, be civil, get through this. The music began, a soft, classical piece. The doors opened, and Damien's carefully constructed composure shattered. He blinked, convinced his eyes were deceiving him, that the stress had finally made him hallucinate. The woman walking slowly, gracefully down the aisle towards him was stunning. Not in the flashy, obvious way of the women he usually dated, but with a deep, captivating beauty that silenced the room. She was tall, slender, but with elegant curves hinted at beneath the simple, exquisitely tailored white gown. Her skin was a rich, smooth shade of dark chocolate, glowing under the soft lights. Her features were anything but harsh. They were regal, perfectly proportioned. High cheekbones, a proud, straight nose, full lips curved in a soft, almost hesitant smile. And her eyes, large, intelligent, almond-shaped eyes fringed by thick lashes, holding a depth and warmth that seemed entirely out of place in this cold, transactional setting. She moved with an innate grace, her head held high, a quiet confidence radiating from her that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with self-possession. This couldn't be Amara Adebayo. This couldn't be the plain, sturdy, ugly woman he'd been dreading. He glanced sideways at his father, whose expression was unreadable, though a flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face before vanishing. He looked at Chief Adebayo, who beamed with paternal pride. No, this was her. As she reached the altar, her eyes met Damien's. There was no malice in them, no judgment, just a calm, searching gaze. In that moment, Damien felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame wash over him. Shame for his assumptions, his prejudice, his shallow fears. He had judged her unseen, based on cruel whispers and calculated omissions. He had dreaded marrying her, imagined her as some sort of social burden, when in reality, she was breathtaking. The officiant began to speak, but Damien barely heard the words. His mind raced. Why the deception? Had his father deliberately misled him? Or had the associate simply been wrong, perhaps mistaking her for someone else, or repeating malicious gossip? The description's strong features suddenly seemed like a gross understatement for her striking, statuesque beauty. Sturdy build was an outright lie. Plain was simply unbelievable. He managed to say his vows, his voice sounding distant even to his own ears. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed against her warm, smooth skin. She did the same, her touch gentle but firm. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss was brief, almost hesitant. Her lips were soft, and for a fleeting second, Damien felt a spark, an unexpected jolt of connection that startled him. The reception was equally strained. Small talk felt impossible. Damien found himself watching Amara across the room. She handled the few necessary introductions with quiet grace, her smile polite but reserved. She seemed as out of place, as uncomfortable in this forced scenario, as he felt. He saw the calculating looks from the few business associates present, the veiled curiosity. But mostly, he saw Amara, this complete stranger who was now his wife, and the chasm between his expectations and reality yawned before him. He wasn't just shocked. He was bewildered, and deeply, profoundly ashamed of the man he'd been just hours before, dreading the appearance of the woman who now stood across the room, captivating in her quiet elegance. The arranged marriage still felt like a cage, but the nature of his confinement had drastically, unexpectedly changed. He wasn't trapped with an embarrassment. He was trapped with a beautiful enigma, and the uncomfortable weight of his own prejudice. The first few weeks of their marriage were an exercise in polite avoidance. They lived in Damien's enormous penthouse apartment, a space designed for a bachelor, all cool metals, sharp angles, and impersonal art. Amara moved through it like a ghost, quiet and unobtrusive. She claimed one of the guest wings as her own, and they rarely crossed paths unless necessary. Damien threw himself into the merger integration, working longer hours than ever, partly to manage the complex business transition, and partly to avoid the awkward silences and unspoken questions that filled the apartment whenever he was home. He hadn't confronted his father about the misleading descriptions. The old man would just dismiss it as unimportant. What mattered was the deal was done. Yet Damien couldn't get Amara out of his mind. His initial shock had given way to a confusing mix of guilt, curiosity, and an undeniable attraction he felt deeply ashamed of, given the circumstances of their union and his previous thoughts. He found himself watching her during their rare, usually silent dinners together. He noticed the small things, the way she held her fork with delicate precision, the intelligence in her eyes when she scanned the headlines on her tablet, the soft cadence of her voice when she spoke occasionally to the household staff. Always politely, respectfully. She wasn't just beautiful, she possessed a quiet dignity that intrigued him. She made no demands, voiced no complaints about their strange arrangement. She spent her days reading, sometimes sketching in a large notepad she kept private, or having quiet video calls with her family back in Nigeria. Her laughter during those calls a warm, unfamiliar sound in the sterile apartment. One evening, Damien came home earlier than usual, exhausted from a marathon negotiation session. He found Amara in the large, state-of-the-art kitchen, something she rarely used as they had a full-time chef. The air was filled with the rich aroma of spices he didn't recognize. She was humming softly, stirring something in a pot on the stove, dressed simply in comfortable trousers and a soft sweater, her hair tied back loosely. She looked relaxed, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the reserved woman he saw at the dinner table. She started slightly when she saw him, her humming ceasing. "Damien, you're home early." "Long day," he replied, loosening his tie. He hesitated by the doorway. "What are you making?" A faint blush rose on her cheeks. "Oh, just something from home, jollof rice. The chef was kind enough to let me use the kitchen." "It smells amazing," he said. And he meant it. It smelled warm, comforting, real. So different from the fancy, often bland, food they usually ate. She offered a small smile. "Would you Like to try some? He found himself nodding, surprising even himself. I'd like that. They ate together in the kitchen, sitting at the small breakfast nook. The jol of rice was delicious, complexly spiced and deeply flavorful. It tasted like care, like tradition. Amara spoke a little about the dish, how it was a staple, how different families had their own secret variations. For the first time, they had a conversation that wasn't stilted or purely functional. He learned she had a degree in art history, that she loved visiting museums, that her sketching was more than a hobby. It was a passion she'd put aside. He found himself asking questions, genuinely curious about her life before this arranged marriage. She answered cautiously at first, but gradually opened up a little, sharing anecdotes about her childhood in Lagos, her close relationship with her younger sister, her love for vibrant colors and textures. He saw glimpses of the woman behind the reserved facade, intelligent, observant, with a quiet warmth she usually kept hidden. As they cleared the dishes together, another unexpected first, Damien felt a shift within him. The guilt was still there, but it was now mixed with a growing respect and a desire to understand this woman he had so thoroughly misjudged. He had married her for business, dreading her appearance, but he was starting to see that her true value, her real beauty, lay far deeper than her stunning looks. It was in her quiet strength, her intelligence, her unexpected warmth. That night, as he lay in his own cold, empty bed, Damien realized the penthouse didn't feel quite so large and sterile anymore. The lingering aroma of jollof rice and the memory of Amara's soft laughter in the kitchen had brought a touch of warmth, a hint of life, into his carefully controlled world. And for the first time, the thought of being married to Amara Adebayo didn't feel like a burden, but like an unexpected, complex opportunity he wasn't sure he deserved. Slowly, tentatively, the ice between them began to thaw. Damien made an effort to come home earlier more often. They started eating dinner together regularly, not just in silence, but talking. He learned about her passion for contemporary African art, her insightful views on global politics, her surprisingly dry sense of humor. She learned about the pressures he faced, the complexities of his business, the lonely weight of responsibility he carried. He discovered she was incredibly sharp. One evening, while discussing a particularly thorny issue with the merger integration, Amara listened patiently before offering a simple, elegant solution that none of his highly paid consultants had considered. He stared at her, momentarily speechless. "What?" she asked, looking slightly uncomfortable under his intense gaze. "That's brilliant," he said, genuinely impressed. "Why didn't you say something before?" She shrugged lightly. "You didn't ask. And it's your company, Damien. I assumed you had it handled." He felt a familiar pang of guilt. He hadn't asked. He had assumed she wouldn't understand, wouldn't be interested. Another layer of his prejudice peeled away. From then on, he started discussing business challenges with her more openly. Her insights were consistently valuable, her perspective fresh and unburdened by the corporate echo chamber he usually operated in. She wasn't just a beautiful face or a quiet presence. She had a formidable mind. He started finding small ways to bridge the gap between their worlds. Learning she missed museums, he arranged a private, after-hours tour of a major gallery exhibiting West African artists. Her face lit up with such genuine delight that it made his chest ache with a strange mix of pleasure and remorse. Seeing her stand before a vibrant canvas, completely absorbed, her eyes shining with passion, he felt a connection to her that went beyond their forced circumstances. He noticed she still kept her sketches private, usually closing her notepad quickly if he entered the room. One afternoon, finding her asleep on the sofa in the library, her sketchbook lay open on her lap. He hesitated, feeling like an intruder. But curiosity won. He carefully picked it up. The pages were filled with stunning charcoal drawings, portraits of the city seen from their windows, intricate studies of fabrics, and, startlingly, several sketches of him. Not posed portraits, but candid moments, him working at his desk, staring out the window, frowning at his phone. She had captured an intensity, a loneliness in his eyes that he hadn't realized was so visible. Seeing himself through her eyes was unsettling, intimate. He gently closed the book and placed it back on her lap, feeling as though he'd glimpsed a hidden part of her soul. The attraction he felt deepened into something more complex. It wasn't just her beauty, though he found himself constantly struck by it, the way she smiled, the curve of her neck, the grace in her hands. It was her intelligence, her quiet resilience, her unexpected kindness. He started wanting to make her smile, to see her eyes light up with interest or laughter. He wanted her to feel comfortable in their home, in their strange marriage. He wanted, he realized with a jolt, for her to be happy. But the shadow of how their marriage began, and his own initial thoughts, lingered between them. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't explained. How could he? How could he admit the ugly prejudice he'd harbored? He feared shattering the fragile truce they had built, feared seeing hurt and disgust replace the cautious warmth that was starting to grow in her eyes when she looked at him. Amara, too, seemed to be lowering her guard, little by little. She started initiating conversations, sharing more about her day, even teasing him gently about his workaholism. There were moments, a shared laugh over a bad movie, a comfortable silence while reading in the same room, a brief, accidental touch of hands reaching for the same object that felt almost normal, almost like a real relationship was blooming in the unlikeliest of circumstances. Yet, there was still a boundary, an invisible line neither of them crossed. They slept in separate wings. Physical intimacy was non-existent beyond fleeting, accidental touches. The foundation of their marriage, a business deal and his own shameful assumptions, remained an unspoken obstacle, a potential landmine waiting to detonate the fragile peace they were building. Damien knew he had to address it, but fear held him back. Fear of destroying the first genuine connection he'd felt in years, and fear of confirming Amara's worst suspicions about the kind of man he truly was. The breaking point came unexpectedly, not with a bang, but with a quiet discovery. Amara had been looking for a specific business document Damien had mentioned needing. His home office, usually immaculate, showed signs of his recent stressful workload. Papers slightly askew, files left out. Tucked inside a folder related to the merger agreement, beneath preliminary contracts, was a thin file labeled A. Personal. Curiosity piqued, thinking it might contain the document he needed. Inside wasn't the business paper. Instead, there were sparse, bullet-pointed notes. They seemed to be a summary, likely dictated by his father or an assistant before the wedding. The words leaped out at her, cold and clinical. Subject: Amara Adebayo, daughter of Chief T. Adebayo. Appearance: plain, unremarkable. Traditional upbringing, likely conservative dress, demeanor. Build: sturdy. Features: strong, possibly harsh. Temperament: reportedly quiet, keeps to self. Assessment: suitable for alliance, not a social asset. Low risk of distraction for DS. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. She read the words again, and then a third time. Plain, unremarkable, sturdy, harsh, not a social asset, low risk of distraction. This was how she had been described to Damien. This was the image he must have had of her before their wedding day. Suddenly, his shock at the altar made horrifying sense. His initial distance, his guarded politeness, It hadn't just been discomfort with the arranged marriage. It had been colored by these insulting, dehumanizing assessments. The gradual thawing between them, his growing warmth, his compliments on her insights, his interest in her art, had it all been a reaction to his surprise? Was he only kind now because she wasn't the ugly woman he'd been expecting? A cold wave of humiliation washed over her, followed by a surge of anger, and then a deep, aching hurt. She had known this was an arranged marriage, a business transaction. She had prepared herself for awkwardness, for a lack of love, perhaps even for indifference. But she hadn't prepared herself for the knowledge that her husband had been braced to marry someone described in such derogatory terms that he likely felt relief, not attraction, upon seeing her. The fragile connection they had built felt suddenly cheapened, tainted by the lie of her supposed unattractiveness. She carefully placed the file back, her hands trembling slightly. She felt foolish for letting her guard down, for starting to hope that something real could grow between them. He hadn't married her. He had married the daughter of Chief Adebayo, and had simply been pleasantly surprised she wasn't as plain or sturdy as advertised. When Damien came home that evening, he immediately sensed a change. The tentative warmth that had begun to characterize their interactions was gone, replaced by a chilling politeness that felt colder than their initial awkwardness. Amara was quiet during dinner, her answers short, her eyes avoiding his. "Is everything all right, Amara?" he finally asked, putting down his fork. She looked up, her gaze direct and unnervingly cool. "Shouldn't it be, Damien? The merger is proceeding smoothly. Your company is secure." The words, spoken softly, struck him like a physical blow. There was an edge to her voice he hadn't heard before, a bitterness that confirmed his fears. She knew. He didn't know how, but she knew. "Amara," he started, his throat tightening. "What's wrong?" "I believe I found some preliminary notes regarding our arrangement," she said, her voice level, betraying no emotion except a steely control. "In your office. Descriptions, assessments." Damien felt his stomach plummet. Shame, hot and heavy, flooded him. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Was I a pleasant surprise, Damien?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "A relief, perhaps? Not quite the plain, sturdy burden you were expecting?" Each word was a precise cut. He flinched. "It wasn't. I mean those notes. I didn't write them." "But you believed them, didn't you?" she pressed, her composure finally cracking, a tremor of hurt entering her voice. "You stood at that altar expecting someone less. Someone unremarkable. Someone who wouldn't be a distraction. Was that it? Was my appearance the only reason you started treating me like a human being?" No, that's not true," he protested, finally looking up, desperate for her to believe him. The hurt in her eyes was more painful than any anger. "Yes, I was. Misled. Grossly misled. And I was shocked when I saw you, because you were beautiful, and I felt like a fool, a prejudiced idiot. But getting to know you, that's different. Your intelligence, your kindness, your perspective." "How can I believe that?" she whispered, shaking her head, tears finally welling in her eyes, making them glisten. "How can I know that any of this—" She gestured vaguely between them. "Isn't just your reaction to not being saddled with the ugly wife you dreaded?" "Because I—" He stopped. He wanted to say, "I love you," but the words felt unearned, inadequate in the face of her pain and his past behavior. How could she trust those words now? "Because I respect you, Amara, deeply. I admire you. I care about you. What I thought before, it was based on ignorance and pressure. And it was wrong. So incredibly wrong. I can't change what I thought then, but I can tell you that it has absolutely no bearing on how I feel now." Amara looked at him, searching his face, The tears spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She didn't speak for a long moment, the silence stretching, heavy with unspoken accusations and fragile hopes. "I don't know if I can trust that, Damien," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I need some time, some space." She stood up and walked out of the dining room, leaving Damien alone at the table, the remnants of their meal growing cold, the chasm between them wider and deeper than ever before. He had feared this moment, and now that it was here, the reality of her pain, caused by his own shallow judgment, was devastating. He had gained his company, but he might have just lost the one person who had started to make his life feel meaningful. Amara retreated back into the quiet solitude she had maintained when she first arrived. The tentative warmth vanished, replaced by a polite but impenetrable wall. She took her meals in her wing, avoided shared spaces, and her sketches remained firmly closed. The apartment felt vast and empty again, colder than ever before. Damien was miserable. Work felt meaningless, the success of the merger hollow. He respected Amara's need for space, but the silence was agonizing. He replayed their confrontation over and over in his mind, hating his initial prejudice, hating that he hadn't found a way to tell her the truth sooner, before she discovered it in such a cold, clinical way. He knew words weren't enough. He had to show her. He had to prove that his feelings, his respect, his admiration were genuine, not just a reaction to her beauty. But how? He started small. He left bouquets of her favorite flowers, lilies he'd learned during one of their earlier conversations, outside her door with simple notes. "Thinking of you." He sourced books by her favorite authors, leaving them on the table in the hallway she used. He didn't push, didn't demand a response, just offered these small gestures, hoping to convey sincerity. He also took a hard look at himself and the assumptions he'd made. He realized his prejudice hadn't just been about Amara. It was woven into how he viewed the world, how he judged people based on superficialities. He started actively challenging those thoughts in himself, in his business dealings, making a conscious effort to see beyond the surface. Weeks passed. The silence between them remained, but Amara stopped refusing the flowers. Occasionally, Damien would see one of the books he'd left for her open on a side table. Small signs, but they gave him a flicker of hope. One evening, driven by a need to bridge the gap, he knocked softly on her door. After a long pause, she opened it, her expression guarded. "Amara," he said, his voice quiet. "I know you need space, but I miss talking to you. There's a new exhibition at the Henderson Gallery. Contemporary African sculpture. I know you're interested in the artists featured. Would you consider going? With me? Not because you have to. Just if you'd like to." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He held his breath. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay, Damien, I'll go." The gallery visit was tentative at first. They walked through the space, initially keeping a careful distance, commenting formally on the pieces. But the art itself, powerful and evocative, began to work its magic. They found themselves drawn to the same sculptures, sharing interpretations, debating meanings. Gradually, the formality eased. They started talking, really talking like they used to. Standing before a striking piece made of reclaimed wood and metal, Amara spoke passionately about the artist's commentary on tradition and modernity. Damien listened, captivated not just by her insights, but by the animation in her face, the spark in her eyes. "You see things I miss," he admitted softly, looking at her instead of the sculpture. "You always have." She met his gaze, a hint of vulnerability replacing the guardedness. "Perhaps you weren't looking before," she replied quietly, but without bitterness. "I wasn't," he confessed. "I was blinded by stupidity and assumptions. And I am so sorry, Amara. Sorry for the thoughts I had. Sorry for the man I was. Sorry I hurt you." He reached out, instinctively, and gently touched her arm. She didn't pull away. "Getting to know you, it's been the best part of this whole mess. You are brilliant and kind and strong, and yes, you are incredibly beautiful. But it's the person you are that I've come to care for, deeply." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they didn't feel like tears of pain. "Damien, I know I have no right to ask for your trust," he continued, his voice earnest, "but I hope, someday, I can earn it. I don't want a marriage based on contracts and obligations. I want more with you." Amara looked down, then back up at him, a hesitant smile touching her lips. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe we can try." It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a start. It was forgiveness. It was hope. As they left the gallery, Damien gently took her hand. This time, she laced her fingers through his. The connection felt fragile, precious, but real. The journey back from the brink was slow, deliberate. They started spending more time together, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. They talked for hours, sharing dreams, fears, and histories. Damien opened up about the pressures of his upbringing, the emotional distance of his father, the loneliness he often felt despite his success. Amara spoke more about her family, her love for her culture, her initial apprehension about marrying a stranger from a different world. They discovered shared passions beyond art, a love for old jazz music, a ridiculous fondness for terrible reality TV shows they watched hidden away in the media room, laughing together. Damien encouraged Amara to pursue her art more seriously, converting one of the unused rooms into a beautiful, light-filled studio for her. Seeing her covered in charcoal dust, completely absorbed and happy in her work, filled him with a quiet joy. Amara, in turn, helped Damien see beyond the boardroom. She encouraged him to reconnect with neglected friendships, to find hobbies outside of work, to appreciate the simple moments. She brought warmth and life not just into the apartment, but into his soul. The physical distance between them gradually closed. It started with lingering touches, arms brushing against each other on the sofa, hands finding each other during walks. One evening, after a long, comfortable silence spent listening to jazz, Damien turned to Amara, his heart full. "Amara," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "I know our beginning was flawed, more than flawed, but what we have now, it feels real. It feels right. I never expected this, never thought I could feel this way, especially not like this. I love you. Not because of the merger, not because you surprised me at the altar." Tears streamed down Amara's face, but this time they were tears of happiness. She leaned into his touch, her eyes shining. "Oh, Damien," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought. I didn't let myself hope, but I love you too. Somewhere along the way, despite everything, I fell in love with you." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the apologies, all the tentative hopes, all the burgeoning love they had found against the odds. It was gentle at first, then deepened, full of passion and relief and the promise of a future they would build together, on their own terms. That night, Amara didn't return to her separate wing. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the vast penthouse finally feeling like a shared home, filled not with obligation, but with love. Their marriage, born from a cold contract and ugly assumptions, had transformed. It wasn't always easy. They still had cultural differences to navigate, past hurts to fully heal, but they faced it together, with honesty, respect, and a deep, abiding affection. Damien learned to appreciate the richness of Amara's heritage, Embracing her family and traditions, Amara found her place not just in Damien's life, but in his world, bringing her own unique blend of grace, intelligence, and warmth, effortlessly charming everyone she met, not as a social asset, but as herself. The man who had dreaded marrying an ugly woman found himself completely devoted to his wife, marveling daily at her inner and outer beauty. He was still a billionaire, still a powerful businessman, but his priorities had shifted. His most successful merger wasn't corporate. It was the union of his heart with hers. They had started with a shocking reveal at the altar, but the real shock, the enduring one, was the depth of the love they found in the most unexpected of circumstances, proving that true beauty and true happiness often lie far beyond initial assumptions. Their arranged marriage had led them, improbably, wonderfully, to a happily ever after.